Jupiter looks beautiful. It's one of the most colorful planets in the solar system. But if you could get close, you would discover something unsettling. Jupiter isn't a planet you can land on. In fact, if you tried to enter it, you would disappear forever within an endless storm. Because Jupiter is made up of more than just colors. It harbors a violent and extreme nature. That's why Jupiter is the most terrifying planet. When we think of planets, our minds imagine something similar to Earth, a place where you can stand on solid ground, with giant mountains that rise into the sky, valleys, perhaps even deep oceans, in other words, a world with a surface, something solid. But Jupiter doesn't work like that because it completely shatters that idea of what a planet is, since it's what scientists call a gas giant. That means there's no ground. There are no continents, rocks, or solid land. There's nothing solid to stand on. Just enormous clouds, layers of gas, and endless storms. It's basically a giant sphere of gas floating in space. Most of the planet is made up of just two elements, hydrogen and helium, the same elements that make up the Sun and most of the stars in the universe. That's why some astronomers say something unsettling. Jupiter is almost a star that never ignited, which is hard to imagine, especially considering it's the largest planet in the solar system. More than 13 Earth-sized planets could fit inside it. But the curious thing is that its sheer size isn't even the most terrifying aspect of the planet, because what's truly unsettling isn't what we see from the outside, it's what happens inside. A place where the pressure becomes so extreme that matter begins to behave in ways that seem almost impossible. There are many reasons why Jupiter is one of the planets that would be impossible to visit. Or perhaps we should take a closer look, starting with the fact that it's known as the planet of eternal storms. On Jupiter's visible surface, there's something astronomers have observed for centuries, an enormous reddish spot, a gigantic vortex slowly swirling among the planet's clouds. It's called the Great Red Spot, and it's not just a cloud, it's a storm, a colossal hurricane trapped within Jupiter's atmosphere. But when we talk about a storm, we're not referring to something like what we see on Earth. On our planet, hurricanes are born in the ocean. They grow for a few days and perhaps last a week or more before dissipating. But on Jupiter, the rules are different because there are no continents to slow down the storms, no mountains, no land. There's only an atmosphere, and that allows the storms to grow without limit. The Great Red Spot is so enormous that the entire Earth could fit inside it. But what's most unsettling isn't its size, but its age. Astronomers first observed it more than 300 years ago, and it's still there today. Within this storm, winds reach speeds of over 600 kilometers per hour, comparable to something we're familiar with. A commercial airliner typically flies at around 800 or 900 kilometers per hour. This means the winds blow almost as fast as a plane in full flight, but relentlessly, constantly, without end. The second reason is the lack of solid ground. You would find yourself in an endless fall. Because on Jupiter, there is no solid surface to stop your descent. So, if you were to cross its upper clouds, you would simply begin to fall for thousands of kilometers. At first, everything would seem relatively calm. You would enter the first layers of enormous clouds made of thick, white ammonia, stretching across the entire planet like an ocean in the sky. But as you continue to descend, the atmosphere begins to change. The clouds become denser, the atmosphere heavier, and soon the sunlight begins to slowly disappear. Then you would pass through giant water clouds, and within them, phenomena occur that would be almost impossible on Earth. Colossal electrical storms. Lightning thousands of times more powerful than that on our planet. Lightning flashes so intense they briefly illuminate the darkness of the deep atmosphere. But the worst is yet to come. The atmosphere no longer feels like air, but like a thick ocean, crushing you from all directions, and yet you would still keep falling. Every kilometer down brings you closer to a place where conditions become so extreme that even matter begins to behave in ways we don't see on any other planet in the solar system. That's the third reason why traveling to Jupiter would be terrifying, because as you descend inside Jupiter, something begins to change. The pressure is initially mild, just an atmosphere heavier than Earth's. But with every kilometer you descend, the pressure increases and increases. on Earth, we are accustomed to a specific pressure, the one we feel at sea level. Our bodies evolved to live under exactly that pressure, which is why we don't feel it. But on Jupiter, things become absurd. Hundreds of kilometers below its clouds, the pressure is already enormous. In the deep layers of the planet, the pressure can be millions of times greater than that on Earth. It's so brutal that it would crush any spacecraft, any robot, any machine ever built by humans, and, of course, any human being. Furthermore, at those depths, matter begins to compress in strange ways. Atoms are pushed closer together. The normal structures of materials cease to exist. Everything becomes denser, heavier, more compressed, to the point that the very nature of matter begins to change. And reason number 4 is found right there. Deep within the planet, below storms and clouds, temperatures become so extreme that matter begins to behave in completely strange ways. There, inside the planet, exists something that sounds almost impossible, a gigantic ocean, but one that isn't made of water, but of liquid metallic hydrogen. The pressure is so brutal that the hydrogen atoms are compressed against each other more and more, until they reach a point where they cease to behave like a gas. Electrons begin to move freely between the atoms, and hydrogen starts to behave like a liquid metal, something that practically doesn't exist naturally on Earth. This metallic ocean occupies a huge portion of Jupiter's interior and is in constant motion, which consequently generates Jupiter's magnetic field, the most powerful in the entire solar system. It's so strong that it's more than 10 times more intense than Earth's. This magnetic field creates a vast region around the planet, a kind of invisible shield filled with charged particles and extreme radiation. In other words, if a spacecraft were to enter that zone for too long, the radiation would begin to destroy its electronic systems. Even the most resilient probes can barely survive there. The fifth and final reason we'll give you is somewhat more obvious, but remembering it makes us question what kind of planet Jupiter can be. It's gigantic. It's so large that it dominates the entire solar system after the Sun. It has more than twice the mass of all the other planets combined. No planet weighs as much as Jupiter. But there's a reason for that, because this world was once close to being something more, something much more powerful, a star. Let's briefly recall how stars form. When a giant cloud of gas collapses under gravity, it begins to compress more and more. The pressure at the center increases. The temperature rises to millions of degrees until the hydrogen atoms begin to fuse. And when that happens, a star is born. That's exactly what happens inside the Sun. But Jupiter never reached that point, even though it's made of the same elements as stars, hydrogen and helium. It simply doesn't have enough mass. If Jupiter were about 80 times more massive, the gravity inside would be much stronger, the pressure in its core would be immense, and the temperature would rise so high that nuclear fusion would begin. At that point, Jupiter would ignite, and the solar system would have 2 suns. Jupiter would have become a star known as a red dwarf. But Jupiter fell just short of that threshold. Too big to be an ordinary planet and too small to become a star. It's in between. That's why the famous astronomer Carl Sagan uttered a phrase that perfectly summarizes what this planet is: Jupiter is a star that never ignited. For many, Jupiter is one of the most beautiful planets in the solar system, thanks to its colors and its size, which allows for a better appreciation of its external structure. But what almost no one knows is that this beautiful facade masks the reality of one of the most dangerous and impossible planets to explore, since any human being, spacecraft, or robot could die and disappear in the attempt. Today, it remains a planet that astonishes with its size and beauty, but it also forces us to consider many unsettling questions. What would have happened if it had become a sun? How would the solar system function if there were 2 suns to illuminate our days? But even more disturbing is wondering if life on Earth would have been possible with 2 suns.